All right, well, let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to Tableau Conference and to the Better Builder session on automating your data preparation with Tableau Prep Builder and Prep Conductor. My name is Sam Osborne, and I am a software engineer on the Prep team. And I've been at Tableau for about 4 years, first starting with Prep Builder and more recently on Prep Conductor. So let's get started. So the target audience for this session is people who have some experience, not too much, but a little bit of experience with either Prep Builder and or Tableau Desktop. And we'll also have a little bit of familiarity with prep concepts like joining data or unioning data, pivoting data, filtering out values and columns and stuff like that, and a little bit of experience with Tableau's calculations language. So this is the agenda that we're going to go over. And I put question marks on the last few things because I'm not sure if we'll have enough time or not, but we'll see how we go. And if anybody has questions throughout the session, please feel free to raise your hand. I personally like to ask questions when I'm in the moment when I need some clarification, so please feel free to stop me. And just in case we don't get to the end, I put the resources slide up here if anybody wants to take a picture. We have a bunch of really good getting started and training videos and stuff on our website. That first link is the releases page, which is where you can find all of the versions of Tableau Prep and Desktop and Server and Reader and all the other products. And then that last link is a blog that's, I don't think they're Tableau employees, but they might be Zen masters. And they do these cool little challenges every week where they give you some sort of challenge, like some sort of data prep challenge, and then they post the solution the next week. So it's fun to follow along with that. So without further ado, let's just dive right in. Most of this session is going to be live demos with Prep Builder. So let me just switch this. All right, so let's get started. So the join experience, in my opinion, is the coolest and best feature in Prep Builder. It's my favorite thing about Prep. You can do this type of data prep in Tableau Desktop, but the experience is just 100 times better in Prep Builder. It's way easier to debug, and so we're going to go into all of that. So this, just a little bit of an overview of Prep Builder if you're not familiar with the UI. So here on the left, we have the Connections tab. So I can't zoom in, unfortunately. It doesn't zoom in, unfortunately. But I'll just kind of point at the stuff so you can see. So here on the left is the Connections pane. It's very similar to Tableau Desktop. You click on the little button and you get all of the different connections that, just like Tableau Desktop. And you pull them all in. These are all hyper extracts. So when you click on an individual one, you'll get the table. If it's a database, you'll have all of your tables listed on the left. And then you can just kind of pull them out like this, very simply. And you can pull them out as many times as you want if you need to join them in together multiple times, but I'm going to remove that. So before going any farther, these data inputs are metadata tables from a Tableau server instance of Prep Conductor usage. So this is a data set that I'm very familiar with, but obviously your data sets will be different. I chose this because I'm very familiar with how to join them together. But so don't get too confused on the flows and the flow runs and stuff like that. It literally is metadata, so it is very meta. But so let's get started. So this is the goal flow that we're gonna try to achieve, but let's start from scratch. So I've already pulled in the same 4 inputs, and all of these inputs have the very classic one-to-many relationship, so they're perfect for joining. And so let's get started. And I do apologize on the zooming. This part here on the flow pane, I can zoom in a little bit. This is a new feature right down here on the bottom right. It's called the Flow Navigator. And it allows you to basically get a little map of the whole flow so you can zoom in and out. So I'm going to do that just so you can see a little bit better. And then you can hide it, which is really nice. So I'm going to start joining these in. It's very simple. First, we're going to add a cleaning step to each of these. because we just want to do maybe some cleaning before we do the joins. And one thing I'm going to highlight is that when you're doing these flows, you can give each node, so these are different nodes. There's different node types. And I strongly suggest putting a name on your nodes as you're going through, because your flows will get very big. And as you start to join them in, it'll use the node name from before, the most previous node. And it can get kind of confusing which nodes you're pulling in, which ones you're joining. These are the different the different node types. I added a cleaning step, but there's aggregate, pivot, joins, unions. The script one is a new one that we just released, so R and Python scripts, and then an output to actually create your output data source. But let's just very quickly rename these nodes. So this is output step runs. We're going to do this for all 4 of these, just so that when we're joining in the tables, it's clear what we're joining together. Okay. Okay. So we're going to join in the flows to the output steps. And then we get the join node, which you can see there. We're going to name this flows and steps. And so this is the join node. The join experience is phenomenal in my opinion. So you add your join clauses here in the left, upper left. And you can see the color little bars come from the nodes before. So you're given some visual direct feedback on which nodes come in. So the flows is the blue and the flow output steps is the green. And then you select your join clauses here. So on that flow output steps, the field that we want to join in is flow ID. And then on flows, we've got the ID there. The first thing that I notice here is we've got all of these fields from the 2 different tables, but there's a lot of fields that basically are duplicated in the names at least. So for example, there's a name on the flow output steps, and there's a name on the flows. There's an ID on the flow output steps, and there's an ID on the flows. And so as we get further into our flow, we're going to you could get kind of confused on where these different fields coming in from. Once you join them together, it's just one big data table. So I definitely recommend doing some cleaning and renaming of your fields before you do the joins, because it's going to make your joins that much more straightforward. So before we do that, though, let's kind of go over the join pane here. So we've got the different join types that we can do. We can do defaults to an inner join, but you can do a left join, a full outer join, all of those. And when you select the different types, here below that, right there, and you can see the 2 different tables that comes in, so the green and the blue, the flows and the flow output steps. And you can see the number of records that come in. And then when you switch between the different types, you'll notice that some of them get included or excluded based on the join. And so that's really nice. If you're not really sure why some of your data is coming in or out, you can either click on the join results here, and then you'll get all the join results data over on the right. Or you can, for example, here, we've got some flows, about 32 flows that don't have any output steps. Why is that the case? We can just click on the little bar chart here and get all of those data records that have been excluded, and you can dig in deeper and debug on your joins. This is not possible in Tableau Desktop without creating a bunch of sheets just to debug your joins, so this is a phenomenal improvement in my opinion. And then below that, we have these join clause recommendations. So these are automatic recommendations that if you want to continue to add more join clauses to scope down your join, those are provided for you there. If you don't like those recommendations, you can just add your own join clauses by adding a new one and selecting the fields from the 2 different tables. So the next thing that I want to show is, so we've got our first join. We've got all the data records pulled in. In this case, those flows that are being excluded, that's okay, because some flows they don't need to have output steps when you publish them to server. So let's minimize that, add a new step here, and let's just take a quick look at the data that's come out of the join. You can do this in the join node, or you can do it in a next step after. Another new feature that we just released that I'd like to highlight is this list view here. So in the past, you just had the option to switch between either the profile pane, which is this pane here, where you get the histograms, you get the binning of the different data values. You can just hide that and just show the crosstab below. And now we have this new list view, which is this thing right here, this third option, up here at the upper right. And this will show you just a list of all the columns in that data table. And it makes it really easy to filter out a lot of columns that you don't need. So you can multi-select, you can hold Shift and grab a bunch that you don't need, or you can hold Control and deselect individual ones or select individual ones. And then you can just get rid of them all here. It's very simple. So when you join in tables, you often get a lot of data records or data fields that come in from each of the tables that you don't need anymore, so you can get rid of them. But because we know that we got to this on the right side of the join node, and we have all these data fields that we don't need, I strongly suggest if you know that you're not going to need them in the join, you don't need them in the join clause, remove them on the left of the join, because you're going to get better interactive performance as you're clicking around the nodes with if you remove more of the fields. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're on the flows table. We're just going to grab them all and remove just a few, or leave just a few. I know I want this one, description. That looks good. So let's remove all the rest of them. Very simple. Got rid of a bunch of columns. It's very easy to clean up your data. And then when you click back over to the right of the join node, you'll see that a lot of those data fields are gone. Another thing I want to highlight, which I was talking about earlier, which is this duplication of these data fields. So both of the tables have an ID column, but they're obviously not the same ID. So we could rename them here, or we could rename them on the left side. If you don't rename them, you'll get this the -1, -2 if you have multiple of the data fields. So let's do that too. Come on. So let's rename this to be the flows ID. Let's rename this to be flow name. And let's say this is flow size. I happen to know this is size in bytes, so we're going to keep that just in case we want to do some analysis on these data tables and things like, how big are the flows, who owns the flows, and we're also going to be joining in these run history. So let's do the same thing on the flow output steps node. Let's get rid of a bunch of these that we don't need. Keep just a few of them and remove all of those. Do the same thing. Let's rename these to flow output step ID, output step name, site ID, step ID. That's good. Okay. So we've joined these in. We come over to the step on the right side of the join, and these ones are all duplicated. So site ID, it's the same site ID because it's the output steps have been joined into their flow, so we could remove the site ID here. Same thing with the flow ID. That was the join clause, so we needed that in the join, but we can remove it here. Another thing you'll notice is we renamed one of the fields that's in the join clause, and it cascades down into the join, so it will make sure that your join still continues to work. Even if you do some preparation on the left side of the join, it still flows through and continues to work, which is really nice. So that's one side of these data tables. Let's do the other ones. Okay, so same idea here. Flow runs and flow output step runs have the classic one-to-many. We already know that we want to clean up a lot of these fields, so let's just go ahead and do that now before we do the join. We're going to want to keep completed at, finish at, or finish code, flow ID, flow step ID, notes, but we can get rid of these three. And then we're going to keep these completed at and started at because we're going to want to do some calculations to calculate, for example, the duration. We're going to duration of the flow output step runs, and the flow runs, and then was it successful, the finish code, those are all fine. Step run ID. And then in server, when you run these, if there's any failures, we put some error messages in the notes field. So then we can start to do analysis on, what types of failures are common, how many, which owners are having their flows fail in server, that type of analysis here. Step run started at. Same thing on the flow run. So you can see with this list view, I really like this new feature. I've been asking for it for months, but when they release this, it makes it so much easier to do this type of this cleaning and renaming of the fields so that you don't have to just get these wide data sets. Flow ID, flow run ID. I'm actually going to copy that so it's a little bit faster. Didn't copy. Oh well. All right. We're going to get rid of progress. We'll get rid of task ID, these ones. Run spec ID, this. Let's get rid of all those. All right. So now we're ready to join these in. And now that we did all this cleaning on the names, it's going to be much easier once we join everything together. You're not going to know which, all the fields like completed at or duration or anything like that. It's going to be very obvious. So same idea, we just grab one of the nodes, drag it over, drop it on. We have the same join pane here. And so these are, I think we're going to need 2 join clauses. We'll do flow ID. And then one of the join clause recommendations down below here at the bottom is flow run ID. That's also one of the join clauses we need. And you can see here in the join results, when I remove this join clause, we got like 300,000 records because we're doing a bunch of duplication. That's not what we want. It's very, when you do this type of join in Tableau Desktop, sometimes you do the join, you think you got it good, and then you go into your vises, and you have a ton more data than you expected. And it's oftentimes because you forgot a join clause or one of the join clauses was not formatted properly. So when we add that flow run ID join clause, we see it goes from like 300,000 to 3,000, which is exactly what we want. There's one flow run here that doesn't have any output step runs. That's OK. But we could just click on that and see what's going on. So there's one flow run. It failed, but it failed because the output steps couldn't find the connections. So that's because the output step didn't exist. OK. So now we've joined these 2 together. Let's rename this step runs. And so I did this removal of the fields. So on each node, there's this list of the changes. I did the removal of the fields on this cleaning step after the join, but you can do that in the join node as well. So I'm going to keep this here. I'm going to go to the join node here, and I'm going to remove the flow ID and the site ID, same like I did here. And now the flow is complaining because I just removed the steps that I'm trying to remove in the next one. But that's OK, because I just duplicated that. So let's just remove that. So now let's join these 2 together. And see what join clauses it recommends. So it's joining on flow ID. That's good. We also want this output step ID. So let's just add this one. And again, you'll see how the join clause, join results over here have updated. There's a few flows and steps that do not have any flow runs, which makes sense because you can publish a flow to server, but you don't have to run it immediately. So these are some flows that have been published, but they haven't been run. But that looks pretty good. Let's name this flows, steps, and runs. You see, as you're typing in here, you can also add a description. So if you have these big flows with a lot of work that you're doing, I definitely suggest putting in the description of what were you trying to accomplish there. So if other people come in to try to maintain the flow or update it or fix some bug or something like that or add things, they'll understand where they are in the flow. especially if your flows get really big. So let's add a step here and take a look at the fields that we came in. There's no changes here yet, so let's hide that. And this looks pretty good. Flow ID 2, flow ID 1. We use those as some join clauses, so we can remove those. Flow run ID, same thing. We can get rid of these. But other than that, these all look pretty good. So now let's do some calculations. So we had the flow runs. Let's create a duration calculated field. I don't know if I can zoom this in. I don't think so. So if you're familiar with the Tableau calculations language, we have a lot of date calculations. So we're going to do a date diff. We're going to do it at the seconds level. I think that's the lowest granularity that you can do. And then we'll do started at, flow, or let's do the step run. So this will be duration for the step run, because each flow can have one or more steps, output steps. So you can run a subset of the output steps or all of them. But this is at the individual step level. And let's also say that it's in seconds. And then we got step run, started at. Let's do completed at, step run, completed at. If you can see here, I also have a little typo in the name, which bothers me. So let's save this and then go back to, I think it's probably here, and fix that. So here on the left, in any of the steps or any of the nodes, there's the list of changes. You can reorder these. In some cases, the order doesn't matter. In some cases, it will. If you try to remove a field after creating a calculated field and then put that removal before, the calculated field will blow up because it can't find that field anymore. So let's find where that typo was. Here it is. So I put a parentheses where it doesn't belong. Let's remove that. And that rename should cascade down to this calculated field. And it does. So the calculated field is still working properly. We created this duration seconds field. Let's take a look at that in the data pane, or the profile pane. So you can see here, most of the step runs complete in less than 1,000 seconds. That makes sense if the flows are pretty simple, but if you have much more complicated flows, you can imagine, the more data that you're piping through, your flow runs might take a much longer time. So this looks pretty good. We could continue to add more calculated fields, do more cleanup if we wanted to, but for now this looks good. So let's create a output step here. Let's name this step runs. So this is the type of data source that we'd want to use to do analysis on the run history. So this is the output step node. You get a data, okay. You get a data grid, so you can see the results of all of your prep to the output step. You can either, that looks terrible. I apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay. So at an output step, you can either save it to a file locally. You have the option of Hyper, TDE, or CSV files. Is it that HDMI? All right. So you can either save it to an output file locally, or you can publish the data source to Tableau Server and then use it in Tableau Desktop to create vizzes. So let's publish this data source. Let's sign in. For some reason, it says I'm not signed in, even though I am. So it's a very similar sign-in experience as in Tableau Desktop. You connect to your server. You use your username and password. And then you select this server to publish, you select the project, And so here, you should give it a name, because this name here versus the name on the output step here, these aren't the same. So this is the output step. This name here is going to be the data source that you publish as. So let's name this step run history. So I could run this flow here in Builder, and it will publish the data source. But I want to publish it to server. I want to publish the flow to server so that I can automate it, and I don't have to continually press this run button every time I want fresh data. So let's publish this flow. Pick a project. You can add a description. If you have input files, you can package them up with the flow. If you have input database connections, you can embed the credentials. Same type of experience as in Tableau Desktop. So let's publish this. And here we are in Tableau Server. So this is Prep Conductor. Publishing a flow to server and then running and scheduling the flow in server is the core scenarios of Tableau Prep Conductor. And so here we have a little picture of the flow, so you remember which flow you're looking at. You have your output steps. If you have more than one, they'd be listed here. You can run them individually, which we'll do right now. You see this little pop-up. Or you can schedule it to run. So let's do that while it's running. So it integrates with the scheduling system of Tableau Server, similar to extract refreshes and subscriptions. You create a scheduled task, just like in creating an extract refresh schedule. Let's run this every Sunday, include all the output steps, and create the task. So now this will run by the schedule. Let's see if that worked. So let's check out the run history. So this flow ran successfully, about 3,000 rows, which makes sense because that's what we saw in the join nodes. So now we have this output data source. If we go back over to the overview page, now we have this output step that has an output name, and you can click this, which will take you to the output data source. So this is a published data source on Tableau Server with the step run history. You got ask data. We could create a workbook here. Let's just do a little sanity check, 3,000 records. So that looks good. We'll just leave that there. And then here on the published data source, there's this little link here, which is a link back to the flow that created this data source. So you have that nice link. So we can go back to the flow. We've already scheduled it to run. Let's just check out the connections tab for a second. So these are all of the input connections here, the input steps, and then the output step there is the published data source, the output step. And if these were database connections, you could edit the connections here. They're just text files, so you can't edit anything. And as part of Prep Conductor, flows integrate with all of the content management systems, so you can favorite them, you can move them to different projects, change owners, there's permissions, similar to all the other content on Tableau Server. All right. Any questions on that before we get started, or keep going?
Are you able to have this be live, or do you have to always have it as an extract run when it runs? Or do you have to have the conductor in order for it to run automatically, or do you look at it live and always have to be effective?
That's a good question. So you're asking if to schedule it in server, do you need to have conductor? So Conductor is the only way to schedule flows that are published to server. If you don't have Conductor, you can't publish the flows and you can't schedule them to run in Tableau Server. There is an option we have a command line client, a CLI. So you can script the flows to run, but you need to set that up yourself. There's documentation on our website, but it's basically, run the flow, here's the flow file, here's some connection credentials if there's input connections. And so you can script that locally or on a VM or something with a cron job on Linux or whatever the Windows analog is at. is to that. But as far as publishing it to server, all of the content management, permissions, scheduling it with the scheduling system, as far as all of that is concerned, you need to get the Prep Conductor, which is a part of the data management add-on. Another part of the data management add-on is the data catalog, which they just demoed in the keynote today, which is another really cool feature. Sorry? So Conductor is the Tableau server aspect. This right here is Prep Builder, and this is the desktop client. And if you have a creator license, you get this for free. You can just download this and install it, and the activation should work automatically with your license. So this is the desktop client, and the command line interface is included with Prep Builder. So if you install this, you get the command line client script. And that works on Windows and Mac. Any other questions? Sorry? From the new version, Conductor is going to be... I'm sorry, I can't hear you. So Conductor is the add-on, and that's part of the data management add-on. And so to do the scheduling, you need to get the Conductor add-on. Any other questions? Sorry?
Yeah.
Which type of calculations?
Level of
LOD, very good question. Yes. So actually, let's jump to the next demo that I'm going to show. And we just recently released a feature called Visual LODs, which I'm not going to show here, but you can accomplish aggregations or LODs already before the Visual LOD, but the Visual LOD feature makes it much more visual and obvious what you're doing. But so let's jump to the next demo, and I'll show you what the aggregations look like. And I'll also show you how to get to the Visual LOD feature. Actually, let's jump back to the slide deck for a second. So just to reiterate on the join experience, it's very easy to switch the join types, inner, left, outer. Another common use case is where you have that type of experience where some of your data records are getting excluded and you don't know why. You can do a join, or you can split basically and do one join and do all of the data that you expect to come in, and do another split and do a join, like an outer join for all of the data records that are not getting joined in for whatever reason. So you create two outputs, one of which is like the dirty data, and then you can go in and investigate that. And then the goal would be, obviously, to make that data record or data table go to 0. So there shouldn't be any records in that one. But in the meantime, while you're debugging, why are these upstream data sources having this dirty data, you can do that type of split where you do the outer join and get the mismatched records. The auto join clauses and the join recommendations. But with a join experience, spend plenty of time in the join nodes debugging your joins, because malformed joins, in my experience, are the most common cause of dirty data, or your viz is being populated with data that you didn't expect. Typically, it's coming from joins that weren't doing what you expected. And then, of course, the field renames cascade down to the join nodes. Question? Yes, actually, let me show that. That's a good. So the question is, can you do like inequality joins? So when you do the join clause, is it like ID equals ID? It's actually easier for me to just show. But so let's go to one of these joins. Oh yes, good call. So when you're looking at one of these join nodes, and you have your join clauses, you can click on the join clause, and you can see that right now we're doing flow ID equals flow ID, but you can switch this operator to all of these. So not equal, greater than or equal, less than or equal. So you could also do joins on a date and say only dates greater than or equal to some date or something like that. That's a very common use case. So you have all of these different operators in a join. Does that answer your question? Anti-joins? Yes. So that's kind of what I was saying about if you have like records that are being excluded and you don't know why. So looking at this one, we have one record, which we can just take a look at that one record. That's easy. But if you have thousands of records, you don't want to go through all of those. So rather than do the inner join, you can do an outer join, and that will exclude all of the stuff that matched and include only the stuff that didn't match, which is the anti-join. And so that right now it's just one record, but so you could do this where you create a split, do the inner join over here, get all the data you expect, do an outer join over here, and create a data source that has all the dirty data or excluded data, and you can dive in, individually on those two separate pieces. That's a good question. Any other questions? Okay, let's dive into the next example. Actually, yes. So the next example that I want to show is pivoting, and a very common use case for this is survey data. If you get surveys, you'll have like one record per person and then hundreds of columns for all of the questions that they answered. Maybe they didn't answer all of the questions, so you might get a bunch of nulls. You can get very wide data sets very easily. So I pulled this data set off of data.world. Real quick, I'm just going to show you what this data set looks like in Excel, just to kind of show it. So this is the first thing you'll notice. Let's zoom this in a little bit. Whoa. So the first thing you'll notice is it's a very wide data set. We've got hundreds of columns. And then it also has this second row, which is like a subheader. So the first row is all of the column headers, the names of the columns. The second one, at least in this data set, is kind of subheaders or sub-questions. And you can see a bunch of these columns are just countries. So it turns out they have this question, what is your citizenship? And they allow a multi-select, so for dual citizens. But you can see there's just a bunch of empty data. So let's use Tableau Prep to clean this all up. And just to highlight here, I've got this ID column. So this is an individual. Each ID is a person. And one of the records has an ID null. That's for that subheader row. So let's get out of Excel, jump into Prep. So this is the goal flow. I pulled in that data source. It's a CSV. Let's zoom in here a little bit. This is a pretty simple flow, but we're going to demonstrate pivoting, and I'll also show the aggregates and a little bit of joining in as well. So let's open up the, nope, I already have that one open. Survey. I think I moved the file. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit. Collapse that. So let's add a step just to kind of check out what the data pane looks like. You'll see first, let's actually check out the fields, and there are a ton. Very small here, you can see it lists how many fields there are up at the top there. There's 236, that means there's 236 columns. That's way too wide. There's only 1,000 rows, so it's not a huge survey results, but so first, let's check out the data pane. Let's remove that one row of the subheaders. We don't need it. So let's just exclude that one value. Now all of the IDs are here. And you can kind of see some interesting breakdowns already. More males than females took this survey. The survey came from a subreddit. Reddit is an online community. The sub-community was about financial independence and retirement early. So it's kind of like a personal finance focused data set. But you can see how old you are, pretty typical histogram. What is your relationship status, single or married, kids, stuff like that. So the first thing we want to do is pivot all of those countries so we can get rid of all of those empty cells, all of the empty data. So let's add a step. First, let's get rid of all those other questions that don't really have to do with the pivoting that we're going to do. So we're just going to remove all of these. So to do that multi-select, I just hold Shift and click 2, and it'll grab everything between. So as you can see, there's a bunch of these columns for the countries. Same idea here. Let's remove those. All right, and now let's pivot. So we add a pivot node. We just do the same multi-select. We're going to grab all of the fields and then just deselect the ID, because everything else we want to pivot. So we've got them all selected. We just drag them over to the pivoted fields section, and we only get 3 columns out of it. So we get that ID column that we left. This is the list view, so let's jump back to the data pane. This is a little easier to check out. So the pivot names are just the column headers. So those get pulled down into one column, and then all of the values, they get pulled into their own column. So let's get rid of this field. These are just the column headers. We don't care about those. And then you'll see all of the IDs. As soon as this runs, you'll see all of the IDs. And you can see here that there are a ton of nulls. Those are representing all of those data cells that were empty. So let's just get rid of all of that. Exclude all those values. And then you can see all of the different countries that people have citizenships with. Canada, US, unsurprisingly, is the largest in this data set. So that looks good. So now let's check out the aggregations. So if we open up this flow navigator, let's add a step here. So basically, there are a few IDs that have multiple citizenship. So let's actually add an aggregate here. And we want to aggregate on ID, and we want to just get a sum of number of records. So we're going to pull ID over here. We're going to pull number of records over to the aggregated fields. You can see that most of the IDs only have 1 record here, which means they have 1 citizenship. There's a handful that have 2 or 3. For the purposes of this demo, I'm going to just exclude these values. But when you're actually doing your analysis and you come to a scenario like this, you need to basically come up with a solution to represent, dual citizens or whatever that situation is in your data, so that you can join it in or exclude it or put it into a different data set, however you want to do your analysis. It really depends on the vises you want to make for how you would accomplish this. In this case, if I wanted to keep these data records, I could convert all of these IDs with dual citizens and just give them a dual citizen value, but we'll just exclude them. And so now that I have the aggregates and I've filtered out all the ones that have dual citizenship, we can join this back in. And this is basically how you would accomplish a level of detail calculation. Your level of detail would be these group fields. As long as you have some way to join it back in to the original bigger data set, that's how you do the level of detail calculations. That's a lot of steps, so they added the visual LOD feature. So let's just join this back in. Whoa. Let's join this back in. Let's zoom out. I think it's not liking that. So we'll join it back in. We'll join on the ID. And you can see here 152 records are getting excluded. Those are the dual citizenships or tri-citizenships or whatever. And we can get rid of the number of records column, and we can get rid of this duplicated ID column. So real quickly, just to show you how you would do the level of visual level of detail, how do you do this? You would do it here. You'd click on one of the fields, and it's basically, oh wait, how do you do this? I think you have to have This build might not have visual LODs enabled. Because I think when you have if you have some field that you want to do a visual LOD on, it has to be some sort of numeric field. And then when you click on this the 3 dots thing, there's another option to create calculated field or create a visual LOD. I think that this build doesn't have it enabled, because that's not a feature that's been released yet. I think it's the next version. So we've pivoted the data. We've filtered out the ones with dual citizens. citizenship. Let's add a branch, pull this down here, and then just join this back in. But before we do the join, we should also filter out all of those citizenship questions, or columns. Question? Sure. To kind of concatenate the text. There isn't. Actually, that's a common feature request. So to basically, when you do the aggregates, you pivot and then you concatenate all the values. That's a common ask. I have, not in this example, but I have a real world use case for that. And it's on the roadmap, is what I can say. Yeah. In this aggregated step, you mean? When I filtered out the 2 and 3? So you're saying basically, like, if sum of number of records is greater than. To keep them in there? So the way that I would accomplish that, the question is there a way to not filter out the 2 and 3 number of records, which indicates multi-citizenships? The way that I would accomplish that is splitting this aggregate node, because you have the 1, 2, and 3 before you filter them out, split them. On one side, filter out and only keep the 2 and 3. On this side, only keep the 1. Do kind of some more calculated fields on just that subset, and then join them back in together. So kind of breaking things out so that you have all the pieces, like very cleanly on your desktop, and then joining them back in together. That's how I would accomplish that. It would take some tweaking and working on those subsets of the data, but that's how I would accomplish that. Because then you would have, on the subset of just like the 2 and 3, you'd have multiple records. So for each of those multiple records, you'd have the country, and then you could join it back in. But it would take some tweaking, but I think you could do it that way. Right, yeah. Question? Sorry? In general, yeah, you can join in the same data set, the same data table as many times as you want, which is a common way to kind of, hack around that type of limitation where you can just basically do the same type of thing a few times. And it really depends on the data set because, you can add multiple layers like that, but if your data set is just really wide or really complex, it might make sense to kind of break it down into smaller pieces. But you can add as many of those types of joining back in as you need to, which is a really good escape hatch here in Prep, because in Tableau Desktop, you can't do that type of, you can only do one layer of pivoting, joining, it's like one time, so it's kind of, this is just way more flexible. Any other questions? No? Question? Clean 3. Yeah, that's a good eyesight. This is redundant. You can remove it. If you wanted to, I'll often put little clean steps just to kind of get the data pane and see what's going on. But yeah, I typically like to squash stuff down as much as I can, but obviously not too much because each node is kind of a set of actions, and you should try to keep them kind of segmented so you kind of remember what's going on at that step in the flow. But yeah, in that case, clean 3 was redundant. I can delete that one. Clean 4 is also redundant. I could clean that or delete that. Clean 5 here, actually what we're going to do, before we join back in the stuff that we pivoted, I'm going to remove all of those citizenship columns because I split them out and did the pivoting over there. So let's just remove them all here. Remove a bunch of fields. So it went from like 230 to 40 fields. It's about 200 countries in the world, makes sense. But now this data set is much narrower, which makes it much easier to do analysis in Tableau Desktop, way less fields on the left. You don't have to scroll through 100 different data fields. So let's add a step here just to check out what the data looks like. But I think we're pretty much done here. So we've got our citizenship. Let's actually rename this. We've got our ID column. We can kind of take a look at some of these other questions. Current occupation, housing status, renting or owning, do you have roommates, all this kind of stuff. So this is a pretty interesting data set. We could do a lot of analysis off of this, stuff on income, degrees, all that kind of stuff, commutes. So we're basically done here. We can just add an output step and set that up, publish it to server, schedule it and run it, same as the other one. I'm not going to demo that, but any questions on that?
So for the output setup, is there an option beside, instead of publishing an extract, can you print it out to a PDW? You can enterprise that word else?
Not yet, but they just today demoed the write to database, which is a new feature we're releasing soon. And I think this build might actually have that enabled. No, it doesn't. But if you had a build or that feature was released, you'd have a third option. So save to file, publish the data source to server, or write to whatever database. So write to MySQL or whatever the output data sources we support. You'd have to have admin credentials that have write permissions to that database. But that's going to be a huge feature. That's the first time, as far as I'm aware, that Tableau is actually writing to outside of the Tableau ecosystem. But that's going to allow a lot of flexibility. So we're all very excited about that. I think that's coming pretty quick.
So that means that you can populate your data lake.
Yeah. So you can do all of your prep flows and then output it to any of your databases back into the same database that you used as inputs. So that's going to just expand the opportunities and the different options for your data prep and data pipelines a great deal. So that's pivoting, a little bit of aggregations, plenty of joins. We only have a few minutes left, but I really quickly want to show off one more thing. Let me see here. Publish data sources as input. So this is a recent feature which I'm very excited about because so Tableau Prep Builder supports not the full set of connectors that Tableau Desktop does, but with publish data sources as input, which is a new feature I think in 19.3, there's a little workaround to now use all of the data connectors that Tableau Desktop supports in Prep Builder. And so let me show that. So real quickly, the data source that I have already on this server is called vteam members. Let's assume that we have some sort of, this is a contrived example, but let's assume that we have some sort of a bunch of data in a bunch of databases that we don't really want to have to manually input data ourselves. So we create this little Google Sheets worksheet, one column, very simple. Right now it's only got one record. There's only one person on this virtual team. That's me. So I've got this published data source. You have to create this in Tableau Desktop. You publish it, but that's a one-time step. And then you can, I think it needs to find the file. That's here. System users, I believe. Okay, so this is a hyperfile locally, and then this is that vteam members published data source on server. So first of all, this unlocks all the different connectors. I really like this pattern as well using Google Sheets because Sometimes, you might have a scenario with your team where you have all this data in a bunch of databases, and then you need a way to kind of manually inject a little bit of data to kind of enrich your analysis. And so this is a really simple flow. I'm not going to go over it too much, but I'm basically just joining this list of users, this table of users by email, and then the virtual team member column, which is just the emails. So we have this flow, we create the output. I think it's all set up already. So let's just publish this real quickly. And you can see it's got this published data source connection. So that's the published data source on Tableau server. Publish this. Let's run it real quick. Refresh. Succeeded, 4 rows. So now we have this new published data source, which is the output, which joins in that Google Sheets using the published data sources as input feature. So let's create a quick little workbook. Let's pull over email, number of records. This is the web editing feature of web editing of workbooks, which is getting really good. Question? That's a good question. Let me show you that. So we have this viz. This is the published data source. That's the output of the flow that I just made. So let's go to the vteam members. Let's add a new member to this vteam. So Adam, how do you spell that? Slipsky. Our CEO, he said he was really excited about this vteam. He wants to be a part of it. So let's add him. Let's rerun this flow. All right, so 6 rows generated. So all I had to do was rerun the flow. Let's refresh this data source, and we'll see Adam's name come up, and he's got 2 records. So you didn't have to refresh the published data source of the Google Sheets. You just have to rerun the flow, and that pipes through all the way to the pipeline, the data pipeline, and pulls in the new data. So this is a really powerful escape hatch and pattern that we're using internally at Tableau, so that you have this little very simple data table, could be 1 column, but you're able to kind of inject and mix in data into your existing pipelines. And if you have this flow scheduled to run, this one here, you don't have to do anything. Eventually, your vizzes will update with the new data. You just have your team add their stuff here in the Google Sheets, and it just goes. So that's published data sources as input. Any questions on that? Sorry? So the Google Sheets data source is a live connection. Let's check that real quick. But and you can see, because it's a published data source, the connection on the connections pane, so this is the flow, the connections here, this vteam members, that's the published data source of the Google Sheets, which you can check out the connections thing here, and it'll say Google Sheets. It's a live connection. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. So you can, the question was switching data fields between dimensions and measures. So Tableau Prep doesn't have the concept of dimensions and measures or like discrete versus continuous. It kind of does when you do this data pane. So like text is obviously discrete, but it's not going to do, it really only matters for continuous or measures when you're doing like aggregations. And so you need to explicitly tell it that it's a numeric field, and then you can do an aggregated field on that. But in the prep flow, it doesn't really have that concept, because that's more of a viz time rendering concept. That's an interesting use case though, or like problem to solve. I don't think there's any way to do that in Prep Builder. but maybe I don't understand the scenario as well. So, any other? Oh, I'm out of time. Sorry? Sure. Thank you.